My name is Elaine Mercer. I'm 48 years old. 10 years ago, I was the most beloved English teacher in Hawthorne, Virginia. I had 17 years of perfect evaluations, a classroom library I built with my own money, 3 Teacher of the Year awards, and a waiting list of students who begged their guidance counselors to put them in my class. Then 4 parents decided I needed to be destroyed. Not disciplined, not transferred, not quietly pushed toward retirement. Destroyed. My career, my reputation, my home, my name. Everything I had spent 17 years building, dismantled in 90 days by 4 families who couldn't accept that their children had earned the grades they received. They fabricated accusations, emotional abuse, favoritism, creating a hostile classroom environment. They coordinated their stories, they pressured other parents to join, they went to the school board, the superintendent, the local newspaper. They stood at podiums with tears in their eyes and told a town that had known me for 17 years that I was a monster. None of it was true. Not one word. But truth doesn't matter when the people telling the lie own half the town. I lost my job. I lost my teaching license. I lost my house because I couldn't pay the mortgage without a salary. I lost friends who were too afraid of the Prescotts and the Aldridges and the Whitfields to be seen with me. I lost everything except one thing: a box of letters from students who knew the truth. Students who wrote to me after I was fired, saying, "You changed my life, and I'm sorry I didn't speak up, and you deserved better." One of those students was a quiet, shy 14-year-old named Marcus Rivera, the son of a hotel housekeeper and a landscaper, a boy who came to my classroom every day during lunch because he had nowhere else to go. A boy who wrote stories in a composition notebook he kept hidden in his backpack because his classmates would have mocked him for it. I told Marcus he was talented. I told him his voice mattered. I told him that the stories he wrote in that notebook could change the world if he was brave enough to share them. Then, I was erased. And Marcus disappeared into the system that had already been designed to forget him. Until last month, when Marcus Rivera, now 34 years old, New York Times bestselling author, National Book Award nominee, the most celebrated literary voice of his generation, called me on a Tuesday evening and said 6 words that made me drop my phone. "Miss Mercer, I wrote our story." His novel, The Classroom at the End of the Road, had been on the bestseller list for 47 weeks. It had been reviewed in every major publication. It had been optioned for a film. It was the book everyone in America was talking about, and I had never read it. Because I stopped reading fiction 10 years ago when the real world took everything fictional happiness had ever promised me. "Miss Mercer," Marcus said, his voice carrying the steadiness of a man who had been planning something for a very long time. "The National Book Award ceremony is November 15th. I've been nominated, and if I win, I want you on that stage with me." "I can't do that, Marcus." "You can. Because the people who destroyed you will be in that audience. Every one of them. And they have no idea what's coming." I should explain. I should go back to the beginning. To the town that made me and the families that broke me, and the quiet boy with a notebook who remembered everything. Hawthorne, Virginia. Population 12,000. Nestled in the Shenandoah Valley between mountains that looked painted, and a river that ran so clear you could count the stones at the bottom. The kind of town that appeared on lists of best small towns in America, and attracted families who wanted good schools, safe streets, and neighbors who knew their names. The schools were the crown jewel. Hawthorne Prep Academy, technically a public school but funded so heavily by private donations that it operated like a private institution. Test scores in the top 5% statewide. College acceptance rates that rivaled boarding schools 3 times its size. A campus that looked like a small university with its brick buildings and manicured quadrangle, and a library that smelled like old leather and new ambition. I arrived in Hawthorne in 2001. 25 years old, fresh from a master's program in English education at the University of Virginia. I had turned down offers from schools in Richmond and Northern Virginia because something about Hawthorne felt right. The mountains, the quiet, the promise of a place where teaching still mattered more than testing. They hired me to teach 9th and 10th grade English. Starting salary $34,000. I didn't care about the money. I cared about the books. About watching a 15-year-old read To Kill a Mockingbird for the first time and see their entire understanding of the world shift in real time. I was good at my job. Not because I was brilliant. Because I cared. Because I stayed late. Because I learned every student's name by the second day and their story by the second week. Because I believed, with every fiber of my being, that every child who walked into my classroom deserved to be seen. That belief would eventually cost me everything. But first, it would save one boy's life. For 17 years, I built something I was proud of. My classroom was room 214 on the second floor of the Humanities building. South-facing windows that let in afternoon light so warm and golden it made even grammar lessons feel like something worth paying attention to. I decorated those walls with my own money. Posters of authors I loved. Maya Angelou, James Baldwin, Toni Morrison. A banner above the whiteboard that read, "Your voice matters," in letters I hand-painted. One summer weekend, when the building was empty and the only sound was cicadas through the open windows. I built a classroom library over 17 years. Started with 32 books from my personal collection. By 2018, it was over 1,400 volumes. Novels, poetry collections, graphic novels, memoirs. I spent between $800 and $1,200 a year of my own salary on books because the school budget allocated $62 per classroom for supplementary materials. $62. For an entire year, I could buy maybe 4 paperbacks with that. So I bought the rest myself. Every paycheck, a portion went to books. I haunted used bookstores and library sales and online clearance sites. I accepted donations from former students who remembered what it felt like to find a book that understood them. Every book had a card inside the front cover where students wrote their names after reading it. Some books had 30 names. 40. A copy of The House on Mango Street had 57 names spanning 12 years of students. A history of my classroom written in the handwriting of teenagers who passed through it and left a piece of themselves behind. My evaluations were perfect. 17 years. Not a single negative review. 3 Teacher of the Year awards. 2005, 2011, 2016. A commendation from the Governor's Office in 2014 for innovative literacy programming. I started an after-school writing workshop in 2007. Tuesdays and Thursdays from 3:30 to 5, open to any student regardless of grade level or ability. The only requirement was that you had to write and you had to be willing to share. The workshop started with 4 students. By 2018, it had 22 regular attendees and a waiting list. Former workshop members had gone on to study journalism, creative writing, communications. 3 had published essays in national magazines before they turned 20. I was not a perfect teacher. I was impatient sometimes. I assigned too much homework. I had impossibly high standards for essay structure that made some students want to throw their laptops out the window. But I was fair. That word mattered to me more than any other word in the English language. Fair. Every student graded by the same rubric. Every essay evaluated by the same criteria. No exceptions for last names or donation histories or whose parents sat on the school board. That fairness is what destroyed me. Because in Hawthorne, Virginia, certain families did not believe in fairness. They believed in outcomes. And when the outcomes didn't match their expectations, they didn't question their children. They came for the teacher. The families that controlled Hawthorne were not royalty. They were something more powerful in a small American town. They were money with memory. The Prescotts, the Aldridges, the Whitfields. 3 families whose names appeared on buildings, scholarship funds, sports facilities, and the annual list of top donors to Hawthorne Prep Academy. Douglas Prescott owned a commercial real estate development company. His wife Diane was president of the PTA, a school board member, and the chair of the Hawthorne Education Foundation, which funneled private donations into the school system. When Diane Prescott spoke at a school board meeting, people listened not because she was right, but because disagreeing with her had consequences. Robert Aldridge ran an investment advisory firm. His wife Karen organized the annual charity auction that raised over $200,000 for the school. Their name was on the gymnasium. Thomas Whitfield was a retired federal prosecutor turned private consultant. His wife Janet was a former television journalist who now ran a local news blog with 30,000 subscribers. When Janet Whitfield wrote about something, people in Hawthorne read it. These 3 families had children in my classes between 2016 and 2018, 6 children total. And every single one of them earned grades that their parents did not like. Not because the children were stupid. They weren't. They were bright, capable students who had been told their entire lives that effort was optional because their parents would handle the results. And for 17 years, other teachers had handled the results. Quietly. A grade bumped here. An extension granted there. A rubric bent just enough to keep the Prescott and Aldridge and Whitfield parents happy. I didn't bend rubrics. I didn't bump grades. And I didn't handle results for anyone. That made me a problem. The trouble started in September 2017. Diane Prescott's daughter Amelia was in my 10th grade English class. Amelia was a pleasant girl, polite, attentive, She did her homework most of the time and participated in class discussions occasionally. She was also a solid B student. Not a criticism. B is a good grade. AB means you understand the material, you're doing the work, and you have room to grow. There is nothing wrong with being a B student. Unless your mother is Diane Prescott. The first email arrived on September 28th, 3 weeks into the school year. Amelia had received a B+ on her first major essay, a personal narrative about a meaningful life experience. Dear Miss Mercer, I am writing to express my concern about Amelia's grade on the recent essay assignment. Amelia is an exceptional student who has maintained straight A's throughout her academic career. AB+ does not reflect her abilities or her effort. I would appreciate the opportunity to discuss your grading criteria and explore how we can ensure Amelia receives grades that accurately represent her potential. Sincerely, Diane Prescott. I responded the way I always responded to grade concerns. Professionally, directly, with specific feedback. Dear Mrs. Prescott, thank you for your email. Amelia's essay demonstrated strong effort and clear improvement in narrative structure. The B+ reflects her current skill level based on the rubric provided to all students at the beginning of the semester. I would be happy to meet with you and Amelia to discuss specific areas where she can strengthen her writing for future assignments. Best regards, Elaine Mercer. Diane did not want to discuss areas for improvement. She wanted the grade changed. When I didn't change it, she escalated. October 15th, a meeting with Principal David Harrington. Diane, Amelia, myself, and David in his office at 3:45 on a Tuesday afternoon. Diane arrived with a folder. Inside were Amelia's essays from previous English classes, all graded A or A-. She spread them across David's desk, like evidence in a trial. As you can see, Amelia has consistently performed at the highest level. This sudden drop in her grades suggests a problem with the instruction, not the student. David looked at me. He was a good principal in most ways. Fair, organized, supportive of his teachers. But he was also a man who understood the politics of Hawthorne, and Diane Prescott was the politics of Hawthorne. Elaine, is there anything you'd like to add? I looked at the essays spread across the desk. I had seen essays like these before. Technically competent, but shallow. Well-structured, but lacking original thought. The kind of writing that earns an A from a teacher who is grading on effort and compliance, rather than critical thinking and depth. Mrs. Prescott, I grade based on a standardized rubric that evaluates critical thinking, textual analysis, original argument, and writing mechanics. The rubric was provided to all students on the first day of class. Amelia's essay earned a B+ because her analysis, while competent, didn't demonstrate the depth of engagement I expect at this level. Diane's eyes narrowed. Are you saying my daughter isn't smart enough for your class? I'm saying she has room to grow. Every student does. That's the point of education. The meeting ended without resolution. David asked me to consider whether my rubric might be too rigorous for 10th grade students. I told him my rubric was the same one I had used for 17 years. That was the first crack, the first tiny fracture in the foundation of my career. Over the next 6 months, 5 more families joined Diane's cause. The Aldridge's son Brandon received a B- on a research paper. Karen Aldridge called the superintendent directly. The Whitfield's daughter Madison received a C+ on a midterm essay. Janet Whitfield published a blog post titled "When High Standards Become Unreasonable" that didn't name me directly, but described a teacher who was more interested in her own ego than her students' success. 2 more families, the Changs and the Hartfords, added their voices. Their children had also received grades lower than expected. The pattern was clear to anyone who looked at it objectively. 6 students from wealthy, connected families had received honest grades for the first time in their academic lives, and their parents were furious. But objectivity was not what Hawthorne was built on. Hawthorne was built on reputation, and the reputation of the Prescotts and the Aldridges and the Whitfields was worth more than the career of one English teacher. What happened next was not a disagreement about grades. It was a coordinated campaign of destruction, and I never saw it coming. March 2018, the accusation that ended everything. I remember the date because it was a Tuesday, and Tuesdays were writing workshop days. I had been looking forward to it. Marcus Rivera, the quiet freshman, who ate lunch in my classroom because the cafeteria overwhelmed him, had finally agreed to share a piece of his writing with the group. I never made it to the workshop. At 2:15, 15 minutes before the final bell, Principal David Harrington appeared at my classroom door. His face was gray, the color of someone delivering news they don't want to deliver. Elaine, can you come to my office? Now, please. I left my students with a reading assignment and followed him down the hallway. The walk took 90 seconds. It felt like an hour. In his office, 3 people were waiting. Superintendent Barbara Walsh, the school board's legal counsel, a man named Theodore Byrne whose presence at a meeting was never a good sign, and Diane Prescott. Diane was crying, or performing crying. After 17 years of teaching, I had learned to tell the difference. Her tears were precise, controlled. The tears of a woman who had rehearsed this moment. "Sit down, Elaine." Barbara's voice was professional but strained. I sat. "We've received a formal complaint." She slid a document across the desk. "Multiple families have alleged that you have created a hostile and emotionally abusive classroom environment. The complaints cite public humiliation of students, discriminatory grading practices, and verbal intimidation." I read the document. 8 pages, signed by 4 families. Prescott, Aldridge, Whitfield, Hartford. The specific allegations were devastating. Allegation 1. Miss Mercer publicly ridiculed Amelia Prescott's essay in front of the entire class, calling it shallow and embarrassing. This never happened. I had discussed Amelia's essay with her privately. I used the word shallow in written feedback, not in class, and it was in the context of encouraging deeper analysis. Allegation 2. Miss Mercer singled out Brandon Aldridge for criticism during a class discussion, telling him his opinion was worthless. I never said the word worthless to any student in 17 years. What I said was, "Let's develop that thought further, Brandon. I think there's more depth there than you're showing." Allegation 3. Ms. Mercer showed favoritism toward students from lower income backgrounds, giving them higher grades than they deserved while penalizing students from established families. This was the most insidious accusation, because it was designed to look like a fairness complaint while actually arguing that I should have been grading wealthy students more generously. The lower-income students they referenced included Marcus Rivera, who earned his A honestly through exceptional writing and relentless effort. Allegation 4. Miss Mercer created an atmosphere of fear and intimidation in her classroom, causing emotional distress to multiple students. No specific incidents were cited. Just a vague claim of atmosphere designed to be impossible to disprove. I looked up from the document. This is not true. None of this is true. Diane spoke through her carefully managed tears. My daughter comes home crying every day because of this woman. She's afraid to participate in class. Her self-esteem has been destroyed. Amelia Prescott participated in class regularly. She had never once appeared upset in my presence. She had, in fact, thanked me the previous week for detailed feedback on her most recent essay. "Elaine," Barbara said, "we're placing you on administrative leave, effective immediately while we investigate these allegations." Administrative leave, the words hit me like a physical blow. "You understand this is standard procedure," Theodore Byrne added. "Not a presumption of guilt, just a precautionary measure." Standard procedure. Precautionary measure, legal language designed to make the destruction of someone's career sound reasonable. I stood. My legs were shaking, but my voice was steady. "I have 17 years of perfect evaluations, 3 Teacher of the Year awards, not a single complaint in almost 2 decades. And you're suspending me based on allegations from parents whose children received grades they didn't like?" "We're following protocol," Barbara repeated. "We take all complaints seriously." "Do you take truth seriously?" I asked. Nobody answered. I was escorted from the building by the school resource officer. Not violently, politely, professionally. The way you escort someone who isn't being arrested but also isn't being given a choice. I walked past my classroom. Room 214, the south-facing windows, the 1,400 books, the banner that said, "Your voice matters." The door was already locked. Marcus Rivera was standing in the hallway. He had been waiting for the writing workshop. He saw me walking with the officer, my purse in one hand, my coat in the other, my face trying very hard not to break. "Miss Mercer?" His voice was small and confused. "What's happening?" I couldn't answer. If I opened my mouth, I would cry. And I was not going to cry in that hallway. I kept walking. Through the front doors, into the parking lot, into my car. And then I cried. "Before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever been accused of something you didn't do by people powerful enough to make the lie stick? Have you ever watched your reputation disintegrate while the people who destroyed it smiled for cameras? Drop a comment below. And if you want to see what happened at that awards ceremony, hit that subscribe button, because when Marcus Rivera walked onto that stage, the people who destroyed me were sitting in the front row. They had no idea what was coming. The investigation lasted 90 days. 3 months of my life spent in suspension waiting for a verdict on accusations I knew were false. During those 90 days, I learned what it means to be erased from a community. The school board hired an independent investigator. His name was Gerald Patterson. He interviewed the complaining parents, the students involved, other teachers, administrators. He reviewed my teaching records, my evaluations, my grading rubrics. I cooperated fully. I provided everything he asked for. Every lesson plan, every grade book, every email, every piece of written feedback I had ever given to the students in question. But cooperation assumes a fair process. And this process was not fair. Gerald Patterson was being paid by the school board. The school board was chaired by Diane Prescott's closest ally, a woman named Linda Morrison, who had been appointed to the position with Diane's endorsement. The investigator's salary was approved by the same board that included members who had personal relationships with the complaining families. The fox was investigating the henhouse. And everyone knew it except, apparently, me. During those 90 days, 3 things happened that sealed my fate. First, Janet Whitfield published a series of blog posts about the investigation. She never named me directly. She referred to the teacher under investigation, or the educator whose methods have raised concerns. But in a town of 12,000 people, everyone knew. The comment sections were vicious. If she's innocent, why was she suspended? Where there's smoke, there's fire. I heard she made kids cry. These comments were from people who had never set foot in my classroom. People who had never met me. People who formed opinions based on carefully crafted innuendo from a woman whose daughter had received a C+. Second, other teachers stopped talking to me. Not all of them, but enough. Colleagues I had worked beside for a decade suddenly couldn't make eye contact in the grocery store. They were afraid, not of me, of the Prescotts, of the Aldridges, of the Whitfields, of being associated with someone those families had targeted. I understood their fear. I did not forgive it. Third, my students were pressured. Not all of them, but the ones whose testimony mattered most. Students who could have defended me were called into meetings with guidance counselors who gently suggested that supporting Miss Mercer might not be in their best interest. Marcus Rivera was one of those students. He was 15 years old, a freshman on a needs-based scholarship, whose continued enrollment at Hawthorne Prep depended on maintaining the school's goodwill. A guidance counselor told Marcus that his close relationship with me could be perceived as inappropriate, that spending lunch periods in my classroom was unusual behavior, that perhaps he should distance himself. Marcus told me this years later. He said he sat in that counselor's office and felt something he had never felt before. The sensation of being told that the one person who had ever believed in him was someone he should be ashamed to know. He didn't distance himself, but he also didn't speak up during the investigation. He was 15. He was scared, and the system that was supposed to protect students was being used to silence them. The investigation concluded on June 14, 2018. Gerald Patterson's report was 16 pages long. The final paragraph read as follows. Based on interviews and documentary evidence, the investigator finds that Miss Mercer's grading practices, while rigorous, deviated significantly from the standards applied by her colleagues. Additionally, multiple students reported feeling uncomfortable or intimidated in her classroom. While no evidence of intentional malice was found, the pattern of complaints suggests a systemic issue with classroom management and interpersonal dynamics, deviated significantly from the standards applied by her colleagues. Translation: she graded honestly while everyone else inflated. Pattern of complaints. Translation: 4 wealthy families coordinated a campaign. Systemic issue with classroom management. Translation: she didn't treat powerful families' children differently. The school board voted 5-2 to terminate my contract. The 2 dissenting votes came from board members who had no financial ties to the complaining families. Diane Prescott voted yes. She didn't recuse herself. Nobody asked her to. I was fired on June 20th, 2018. 17 years, 3 awards, 1,400 books, 1 banner that said "Your Voice Matters," gone. The aftermath was systematic and total. Within a month of my termination, the Virginia Board of Education opened a review of my teaching license. This was initiated by a complaint filed by Theodore Byrne, the school board's legal counsel, citing the investigation's findings. The review process took 4 months. During that time, I could not teach anywhere. My license was suspended pending the outcome. I hired a lawyer, a woman named Patricia Dunn from Charlottesville, who specialized in education law. She charged $250 an hour, which I paid by draining my savings account. then my retirement fund, then by selling my car and buying a 12-year-old Honda Civic with 200,000 miles on it. Patricia was good. She was thorough and fierce, and she believed me. But she was fighting a system that had already made up its mind. The Board of Education revoked my license in October 2018. The stated reason was a pattern of professional conduct inconsistent with Virginia teaching standards. I was 40 years old. I had been a teacher since I was 25. It was the only profession I had ever known, the only profession I had ever wanted to know. And it was gone. The financial collapse followed quickly. Without a salary, I couldn't pay my mortgage. The bank sent notices, then warnings, then a final letter with a date I will never forget. I lost my house on Maple Street in January 2019, a 3-bedroom cottage I had bought in 2008 with a down payment saved over 7 years. The house where I graded papers at the kitchen table and read novels on the porch swing and hosted end-of-year barbecues for my students. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment above a hardware store on Route 11. $475 a month. The shower dripped constantly and the heat worked when it felt like it. I got a job at a bookstore in Staunton, 40 minutes away. Minimum wage. The irony of a woman who had spent 17 years teaching literature, now shelving it for $7.25 an hour, was not lost on me. I stopped going out in Hawthorne, not because I was ashamed, because the looks were unbearable. Pity from people who believed I was guilty. Avoidance from people who knew I wasn't, but were too afraid to say so. And worst of all, satisfaction from the families who had destroyed me, spotted occasionally at the farmer's market or the pharmacy, living their lives as if they hadn't just ended mine. I saw Diane Prescott once at the gas station on Route 250. She was filling her Range Rover. She looked at me, looked at my 12-year-old Civic, and smiled. Not a cruel smile. The smile of a woman who had won so completely that she could afford to feel sorry for her victim. I drove home and sat in my apartment and didn't move for 3 hours. Friends disappeared. Not all at once. Gradually, the phone calls became less frequent. The invitations stopped. My best friend of 11 years, a history teacher named Carol Washington, stopped returning my texts after the school board warned staff against maintaining contact with me. Carol sent me one final message. "I'm sorry, Elaine. I believe you. But I can't afford to lose my job, too. I have kids." I understood. I hated that I understood. But I did. My relationship ended, too. I had been dating a man named Robert Keene for 2 years, an accountant from Winchester. Kind, steady, the kind of person who brought soup when you were sick and fixed things without being asked. He tried to stay. He really did. But being the partner of the teacher everyone believed was abusive came with its own social consequences. His clients asked questions. His friends made comments. His mother sent him a link to Janet Whitfield's blog with a note that said, "Is this true?" We broke up in March 2019. He cried. I didn't. I had used up all my tears by then. By the summer of 2019, I was alone. Truly alone. A 41-year-old woman working minimum wage at a bookstore, living above a hardware store, with no career, no license, no relationships, and a reputation so thoroughly destroyed that my name had become a cautionary tale in Hawthorne, Virginia. Remember what happened to Elaine Mercer? That was the warning parents whispered to each other. Don't let your standards get in the way of reality. I thought about giving up. I need to be honest about that. There were nights in that apartment when the dripping shower and the failing heat and the absolute silence of a life emptied of everyone who ever mattered made me wonder if there was a point to continuing. I didn't give up, not because I was brave, because I was angry. Because somewhere underneath the grief and the loneliness and the humiliation, there was a fire that Diane Prescott and Karen Aldridge and Janet Whitfield had not managed to extinguish. They took my career, they took my home, they took my reputation, they took my friends and my relationship, and my faith in the system I had devoted my life to. But they did not take my anger. And anger, it turns out, is a very effective fuel. I just didn't know yet what I was going to do with it. September 2022. 4 years after I was fired. A phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I was shelving books at the Staunton bookstore. Tuesday afternoon. Quiet. The store smelled like old paper and coffee, which used to comfort me. Now it just reminded me of what I'd lost. I almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers usually meant debt collectors or scam calls. Both had become regular features of my life. But something made me pick up. Ms. Mercer? The voice was deeper than I remembered. But I knew it instantly. The way you know the voice of someone whose words you once held in your hands and said, "This matters." Keep writing. Marcus? Yeah, he laughed softly. It's me. It's been a while. 4 years. 4 years since I had heard from the quiet boy who ate lunch in my classroom because the cafeteria was too loud. The boy who wrote stories in a composition notebook and was afraid to show anyone. Marcus. I sat down on the floor between the shelves. My legs wouldn't hold me. How are you? I'm good, Ms. Mercer. I'm really good. He paused. Actually, I'm calling because something happened. Something I need to tell you. He told me. After I was fired, Marcus had finished high school at Hawthorne Prep. Quietly, kept his head down. Graduated with honors in 2021. Got a full scholarship to Columbia University. Studied creative writing. The New York Times called it the most important novel about education in a generation. The Washington Post said Marcus Rivera has written the book that every teacher, parent, and school board member needs to read. NPR dedicated an entire episode to the novel and its themes of class, power, and institutional corruption. The book sold 200,000 copies in its first month. It hit the bestseller list and stayed there. Week after week after week. 47 weeks and counting. Book clubs read it. School boards discussed it. Universities added it to their curricula. The word Hawthorne became shorthand for institutional betrayal, the way other place names become synonymous with their scandals. And in Hawthorne, Virginia, people started reading. The Prescotts read it. The Aldridges read it. The Whitfields read it. The school board read it. Principal David Harrington read it. Every person who had been part of my destruction held that book in their hands and saw themselves reflected back in fictional characters they couldn't deny. Marcus had changed the names. Ms. Eleanor Marsh instead of Elaine Mercer, Thornfield Academy instead of Hawthorne Prep, the Preston family instead of the Prescotts. But the details were exact, the B+ on the personal narrative, the meeting with the principal, the blog posts, the coordinated complaints, the investigation, the firing, the destroyed career, the quiet boy with the notebook. Everyone in Hawthorne knew. And suddenly the story they had told themselves for 4 years, the story where I was the villain and the wealthy families were protecting their children, didn't hold together anymore. Because Marcus Rivera wasn't a disgruntled former student with an axe to grind. He was the National Book Award-nominated voice of a generation. And he was telling the world what Hawthorne had done to the teacher who saved his life. Janet Whitfield took down her blog. All of it, every post, the entire archive. Deleted overnight without explanation. Diane Prescott stopped attending school board meetings. She sent a proxy. Then she resigned her position entirely, citing personal reasons. Karen Aldridge withdrew from the charity auction committee. The gymnasium still had the Aldridge name on it, but no one looked at it the same way anymore. The cracks were forming. But the real earthquake was still coming. Because Marcus Rivera wasn't just writing books. He was planning something. And he had been planning it for a very long time. October 2024, Marcus called me again. This time his voice was different, charged with something electric. The energy of a man who had been building toward a moment for 6 years. Miss Mercer, I've been nominated for the National Book Award. I sat down. The National Book Award. The most prestigious literary prize in America. Given to the best work of fiction published in the United States each year. Previous winners included William Faulkner, Ralph Ellison, Flannery O'Connor, literary giants, and Marcus Rivera, the boy with the composition notebook, the boy who ate lunch in room 214 because nowhere else felt safe. Marcus, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you. Thank you. He paused. But that's not why I'm calling. Okay, the ceremony is November 15th at Cipriani Wall Street in Manhattan. 800 guests, publishers, agents, authors, critics, politicians, the literary establishment of America in one room. I've been given 2 additional seats for personal guests. One is for my mother. He paused again. The other is for you. Marcus, I can't. You can, he said firmly. And I need you to hear why. He told me what he had been planning. Over the past year, while promoting the classroom at the end of the road, Marcus had given dozens of interviews. In every interview, he talked about the teacher who inspired him, without naming me. He talked about the teacher who inspired him. Without naming me, he talked about the injustice of what happened to her. He talked about the system that destroyed a good person to protect powerful families. But he had never revealed the real identity of the teacher. Never named the real town. Never connected the fiction to the facts. Until now, if I win the National Book Award, Marcus said, I'm going to tell the whole story. The real story. Your name. Hawthorne, the Prescotts, the Aldridges, the Whitfields, everything. My heart was pounding. Marcus, that could create legal problems. For both of us. I've consulted with 3 attorneys. Everything in the novel is either fictionalized enough to avoid defamation claims, or is based on documented facts. The school board minutes from your termination are public record. The investigation report is public record. Janet Whitfield's blog posts were published publicly. I have screenshots of everything she deleted. He had been building this for years. Every interview a breadcrumb. Every public appearance a step toward this moment. There's more, he said. More? I reached out to other students from your classes. Former students who wanted to speak up during the investigation, but were afraid. People who have carried guilt for 6 years about staying silent. How many? 14. 14 former students who have agreed to provide written statements about their experience in your classroom. Statements that directly contradict every allegation made against you. I couldn't speak. And Ms. Mercer? One more thing. He took a breath. I hired a private investigator 6 months ago to look into Gerald Patterson, the investigator who conducted your case review. What did he find? Patterson's firm received 3 contracts from the Hawthorne School District between 2015 and 2020. Total value, $147,000. All 3 contracts were approved by the school board during Diane Prescott's tenure as board member. He was on their payroll, not officially, but the pattern is clear. They hired an investigator who depended on them for future business. He was never going to find in your favor. Marcus paused. I also found something about Dr. Theodore Byrne, the school board's legal counsel who filed the complaint against your teaching license. What about him? Byrne's wife is Diane Prescott's sister. The room tilted. The legal counsel who had initiated the process to revoke my teaching license was the brother-in-law of the woman who led the campaign against me. Nobody disclosed this. Marcus's voice was tight with controlled anger. Not the school board. Not Byrne. Not Prescott. A family connection that should have been an automatic disqualification, and they buried it. I sat in silence for a long time. 6 years of believing I had been defeated by a system that was simply unfair. Now learning that it wasn't just unfair, it was rigged. Deliberately, systematically, personally rigged by people who were supposed to be impartial. Miss Mercer? Marcus said quietly. Will you come to the ceremony? I thought about room 214, the south-facing windows, the 1,400 books, the banner that said, Your voice matters. I thought about Marcus at 15, standing in the hallway watching me walk away, too scared to speak, too young to fight. I thought about Diane Prescott's smile at the gas station, the pitying smile of a woman who thought she had won. Yes, I said. I'll be there. Good. Because when I read from that stage, I want them to see you. I want them to know that the woman they destroyed is alive, is present, and is watching them face the truth. Who are they? Marcus's voice went cold. I sent invitations. Through the publisher. To the Prescotts, the Aldridges, and the Whitfields. Told them it was a celebration of literature and education in small-town America. They accepted immediately. All 3 families. They don't know. They have no idea. The ceremony was in 3 weeks. 3 weeks to prepare for the moment that would either vindicate me or destroy me all over again. I called one person, Patricia Dunn, my former attorney, the woman who had fought for me and lost because the system was broken. Patricia, I said, I need you to come to New York on November 15th. What's happening on November 15th? The truth, I said. After 6 years, the truth. November 15th, 2024. Cipriani Wall Street, Manhattan. The building was a cathedral of marble and gold, 40-foot ceilings, Corinthian columns, the kind of architecture that makes you feel small and significant at the same time. 800 guests filled the grand ballroom, publishers in designer suits, agents in cocktail dresses, authors whose names I had once taught from, critics whose reviews could make or break careers, senators, professors, the literary establishment of America dressed to celebrate its highest honor. I stood in the entrance wearing a dark blue dress I had bought at a consignment shop in Staunton for $37. It was the nicest thing I had worn in 6 years. My hands were steady, my heart was not. Patricia Dunn stood beside me, professional in a charcoal pantsuit. Her briefcase contained copies of every document Marcus had gathered, the Patterson contracts, the Byrne connection, The 14 student statements. 6 years of evidence compiled into a single devastating portfolio. Marcus's mother, Elena Rivera, found us in the lobby. She was a small woman with calloused hands and the same quiet intensity her son carried. "You must be Ms. Mercer." She took my hands in hers. "My son talks about you like you hung the moon." "Your son saved my life," I said. "He just doesn't know it yet." The Prescotts at a table near the front. Douglas in a tuxedo, Diane in emerald green, her hair freshly styled, her smile freshly polished. They were laughing with a publisher I recognized from television. The Aldridges 2 tables over. Robert and Karen, matching champagne flutes, the picture of cultural sophistication. The Whitfields near the stage. Thomas and Janet. Janet was taking notes, probably already writing the blog post about how they had discovered Marcus Rivera before anyone else. None of them had seen me. I was a ghost from a small town in Virginia, standing in a Manhattan ballroom full of people who actually mattered. To them, I was invisible. I had been invisible for 6 years. Not tonight. The ceremony began at 7:30. Awards were given in multiple categories: poetry, nonfiction, young adult literature. Each announcement was followed by speeches and applause, and the particular electricity of watching someone receive validation for years of work. Then the final award, fiction. The presenter was a literary legend whose name I had taught from for 17 years. She stood at the podium, opened the envelope, and smiled. "The winner of the National Book Award for Fiction is Marcus Rivera, for the classroom at the end of the road." The ballroom erupted, standing ovation, 800 people on their feet, cameras flashing. The applause rolling like thunder through that marble cathedral. Marcus walked to the stage. He was wearing a simple navy suit, no flash, no pretension. He looked exactly like what he was, a boy from a working-class family who had written something true and been heard. He stood at the podium and waited for the applause to die. It took a long time. "Thank you," he said. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. The weight of a story he had been carrying for 6 years. "I wrote this book because of a teacher." He paused. "A teacher named Elaine Mercer." The room shifted. 800 faces registering the transition from celebration to something else, something heavier. At the Prescott table, Diane's champagne smile flickered. Not gone yet, but wavering. "Ms. Mercer taught English at a school called Hawthorne Prep Academy in Hawthorne, Virginia. For 17 years, she was the best teacher in that school. 3 Teacher of the Year awards, perfect evaluations, a classroom library she built with her own money, over 1,400 books." He looked directly at the Prescott table. "And in 2018, 4 families destroyed her because she gave their children honest grades." The ballroom went silent. Not gradually, instantly. Like a switch had been flipped. "I'm not going to use fictional names tonight," Marcus continued, "because this is not fiction. This is what happened." He named them: Diane Prescott, Karen Aldridge, Janet Whitfield, Helen Hartford. He described what each family did: the coordinated complaints, the fabricated accusations, the blog posts, the pressured students, the corrupt investigation. Diane Prescott's face drained of color. Douglas grabbed her arm. At the Aldridge table, Karen was shaking her head back and forth in small, rapid movements. Janet Whitfield had stopped writing. "The investigation was conducted by Gerald Patterson," Marcus said. "His firm received $147,000 in contracts from the school board during the period Diane Prescott served as board member. He was never independent. He was never impartial. He was paid to deliver a predetermined outcome." Murmurs rippled through the 800 guests. This was no longer an acceptance speech. This was testimony. The complaint to revoke Ms. Mercer's teaching license was filed by Theodore Byrne, the school board's legal counsel. Marcus paused for effect. Theodore Byrne is Diane Prescott's brother-in-law. This relationship was never disclosed. A gasp from somewhere near the middle of the room. Marcus pulled a folder from inside his jacket. "I have here 14 written statements from former students of Miss Mercer. Students who were pressured into silence during the investigation. Students who have carried guilt for 6 years. Every single one of them says the same thing. Miss Mercer was not abusive. She was not hostile. She was fair." He opened the folder. "Let me read. 1. From Sarah Chen, who was 16 at the time. Miss Mercer was the only teacher who ever challenged me to think instead of memorize. When my parents joined the complaint against her, I was told to stay quiet. I've regretted my silence every day since. She deserved better. We all knew it. We were just too afraid to say it. Marcus set down the folder. Elaine Mercer is in this room tonight. 800 heads turned, scanning the ballroom, looking for the woman they had just heard about. Miss Mercer, Marcus said, extending his hand toward me. Will you please come up here? I stood. My legs were shaking. The room was spinning with lights and faces and the sound of my own heartbeat. Patricia squeezed my arm. Go, she whispered. You've earned this. I walked to the stage, through 800 people, past the Prescott table where Diane sat frozen, past the Aldridges who couldn't make eye contact, past the Whitfields who looked like they wanted the marble floor to open and swallow them. I climbed the steps. Marcus was waiting. He didn't hand me the award. He did something better. He hugged me, on stage, in front of 800 people and cameras and the literary establishment of America. This award belongs to you, he whispered. Every word I write started in your classroom. He stepped back, handed me the microphone. I looked out at the room, at the faces, at the cameras, at the 3 families who had destroyed me sitting in the front rows of the most prestigious literary ceremony in America, trapped in their seats by their own desire to be seen at important events. I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't need one. I had been preparing for this moment for 6 years. I was a teacher, I said. For 17 years. I believed that every student who walked into my classroom deserved to be seen, to be challenged, to be told the truth about their work, even when that truth was uncomfortable. I looked at Diane Prescott. 4 families disagreed. Not with my methods, with my results. Their children received grades that reflected their actual performance, and instead of using those grades as motivation to improve, those families chose to destroy the person who gave them. My voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. They fabricated accusations. They pressured students into silence. They hired a compromised investigator. They used a family connection to the school board's legal counsel to revoke my teaching license. And they told an entire town that I was a monster. I paused. I lost my career, my home, my savings, my relationships, my friends, my faith in the system I devoted my life to. I spent 4 years working minimum wage at a bookstore, living above a hardware store, and wondering if anyone would ever know the truth. I looked at Marcus, then a boy I once told your voice matters wrote a book, and the whole world heard. The applause started before I finished speaking. Not polite applause, the kind that shakes the room, the kind that comes from 800 people simultaneously recognizing injustice and choosing not to be silent about it. I looked one more time at the Prescott table. Diane was not there. At some point during my speech, she had left. Her chair was empty. Her champagne glass was still full. Douglas sat alone, his face buried in his hands. The Aldridges were gone too, both seats empty. Janet Whitfield remained. She sat perfectly still, staring at the table in front of her, her pen motionless in her hand. She hadn't written a single word. Marcus took back the microphone. One last thing, he said. This morning, I authorized my legal team to file a formal complaint with the Virginia Board of Education, requesting the reinstatement of Elaine Mercer's teaching license. Accompanying the complaint are 14 student statements, financial records documenting the conflicts of interest in the original investigation, and a request for a full review of the school board's actions. He looked directly into the cameras. Miss Mercer didn't just lose her job. She was robbed of her vocation by people who valued their children's grades more than a teacher's life. This complaint demands that the state of Virginia acknowledge what happened and restore what was taken. He set the award on the podium. This is the National Book Award. But the story it tells is not mine. I looked at Marcus, at Patricia, at Elena Rivera, who was crying into a napkin and smiling at the same time. I looked at the empty seats where the Prescotts and the Aldridges had been sitting, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 6 years. Not vindication, not revenge. Existence. The simple, overwhelming sensation of existing again, of being seen, of being heard, of mattering. Your voice matters. I had told that to every student for 17 years. It took 6 years of silence to understand what it really meant. 6 months after the ceremony. The fallout was comprehensive and unrelenting. The Virginia Board of Education launched a formal review of my case within 2 weeks of Marcus's complaint. The review was conducted by a panel of 3 independent educators with no ties to Hawthorne or Chatham County. Their findings were published in February 2025. The panel determined that the original investigation into Ms. Mercer's conduct was fundamentally compromised by undisclosed conflicts of interest, including the financial relationship between the investigator and the school board, and the familial relationship between the board's legal counsel and the primary complainant. The panel further found that the allegations against Miss Mercer were not supported by credible evidence, and that her termination was the result of coordinated action by a small number of families whose grievances were based on grading outcomes rather than legitimate concerns about student welfare. The panel recommended immediate reinstatement of Miss Mercer's teaching license with full restoration of her professional record. I received the letter on a Tuesday morning. I read it standing in the kitchen of my apartment above the hardware store. Then I called Patricia. They reinstated my license. I know. She was already crying. I got the call an hour ago. I was waiting for you to read the letter first. Does this mean what I think it means? It means you can teach again, Elaine. Anywhere, any school. Your record is clean. I sat down on the kitchen floor, the same kitchen floor where I had sat 6 years ago, wondering if there was a point to continuing. There was a point. There had always been a point. The consequences for the families came swiftly and from multiple directions. Gerald Patterson's investigation firm was decertified by the Virginia Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation. His methodology was cited as incompatible with professional standards. He would never conduct another investigation in the state. Theodore Byrne was referred to the Virginia State Bar for an ethics review. The failure to disclose his family connection to Diane Prescott was found to be a violation of professional conduct standards. His law license was suspended pending review. The Hawthorne School Board was restructured. Linda Morrison resigned. 2 other members followed. The state superintendent appointed an interim board pending new elections. Principal David Harrington retired. His statement cited personal reasons, but those who knew him understood. He had allowed my destruction to happen on his watch, not out of malice, out of cowardice. And the weight of that cowardice had finally become too heavy to carry. Diane Prescott disappeared from public life in Hawthorne. She and Douglas put their house on the market in January. They moved to Florida in March. No forwarding address, no goodbye. Janet Whitfield published one final blog post before deleting her entire site permanently. The post was titled, "I was wrong." 2 paragraphs, no names, no details, just a vague acknowledgement that sometimes we believe what we want to believe and hurt people who didn't deserve it. It was not enough. It was not close to enough, but it was something. Karen Aldridge sent me a letter, handwritten, 3 pages. Dear Miss Mercer, I have wanted to write this letter for a long time. I was wrong. I was wrong to join the complaint against you. I was wrong to pressure other parents. I was wrong to stay silent when I knew the investigation was not fair. Brandon earned that B-. I knew it at the time. He knew it too. But I couldn't accept that my son wasn't perfect because in our world, anything less than perfect meant we had failed as parents. We hadn't failed. You hadn't failed. We just couldn't see the difference between a grade and a child's worth. I am sorry. I know that doesn't fix what happened, but I needed you to know. Karen Aldridge. I read it twice, put it in a drawer, not because it didn't matter, because forgiveness is a process, not a moment. And I wasn't ready yet. Marcus called me on a Sunday morning in March. I have news, he said, and I want you to hear it from me first. Okay. The classroom at the end of the road has been optioned for a feature film. Major studio. A list director. They want to start production this fall. I exhaled slowly. A movie. And Miss Mercer, they want you involved. As a consultant. They want the story told right. The real story. I thought about room 214. The south-facing windows. The 1,400 books that I had been told were boxed up and donated to a library after I was fired. I thought about Marcus at 15. Notebook in his backpack. Lunch in my classroom. Too scared to share his stories. Too talented to stay silent forever. I thought about what it means to tell a story honestly. To refuse to bend the truth even when the truth cost you everything. Yes, I said. I'll do it. In September 2025, I accepted a teaching position. Not at Hawthorne Prep. At a public school in Charlottesville. Jefferson Middle School, 7th and 8th grade English. The starting salary was $38,000. Less than I had made at Hawthorne. The classroom was smaller. The book budget was non-existent. I didn't care. On the first day, I hung a banner above the whiteboard. Same words, same hand-painted letters. Made fresh because the original was gone. Like so many original things. Your voice matters. 26 students looked up at it. Some curious. Some skeptical. Some already bored. One girl in the back row, quiet, watchful, a notebook clutched against her chest like a shield, read the banner and then looked at me with eyes that asked a question I recognized from 20 years ago. "Do you mean it?" I looked at her. At all of them. These 26 faces that didn't know my history, didn't know about Hawthorne or the Prescotts or the 6 years I spent in exile. They just knew I was their English teacher. And I was looking at them like they mattered. Because they did. If you're still here, let me leave you with this. For 17 years, I told students that their voices mattered. Then my voice was taken from me by people who believed their money and their influence were more important than the truth. For 6 years, I was silent, not by choice, by force. Pushed out of the profession I loved, stripped of my credentials, erased from the community I had served. But silence is not permanent, and the truth doesn't expire just because powerful people try to bury it. A boy with a composition notebook remembered. He remembered every word, every lesson, every moment of kindness in a classroom that smelled like old paper and afternoon light. And he turned that memory into a story that the whole world heard. If you are a teacher, if you are someone who gives everything to a job that pays too little and demands too much, know this. What you do matters, even when nobody says it, even when the system fails you, even when the people you serve turn against you. What you plant in a classroom grows in ways you cannot predict and cannot control. Marcus Rivera wrote a novel because I told him his voice mattered. That one sentence, spoken to a frightened 15-year-old in a classroom on a Tuesday afternoon, became a National Book Award and a story that exposed a corrupt system and changed the lives of everyone it touched. You never know which sentence will be the one that changes everything. So say them all, say them honestly, say them fairly, and say them even when it costs you. Because your voice matters, even when the world tells you it doesn't. Especially then, thank you for staying with me through this story. If it resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. I want to hear from you. Have you ever been punished for doing the right thing? Have you ever been silenced by people with more power than you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you know a teacher who has ever been treated unfairly, share this video with them. They deserve to know their voice matters too. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and never ever stop telling the truth.